I never thought it would feel like this, so light, like nothing at all had landed. The program booklet slid in my hands, thin and glossy, the kind of paper that resisted creases. There was a printed gold crest in the corner, Centennial Gala, honoring a century of excellence. Inside each page bore a line of names under bold headings: Legacy, Faculty Community Impact, Notable Alumni. I turned them slowly, not looking for anything in particular, just noticing what wasn't there. I didn't fold the booklet or tuck it away. I let it rest on my lap while I waited in the side hall where the lighting buzzed faintly, and someone had spilled what smelled like sweet punch hours ago. Across the foyer, a photographer adjusted her tripod. Another woman with a clipboard motioned for someone to stand beneath the gold and white balloon arch. My name wasn't called. No one looked over. Scott walked in from the valet entrance fixing his tie. He didn't see me at first. Or maybe he did. He stopped near the coat check and looked toward the crowd. Then he spotted Melissa and walked straight past. "Mom, you came. This must be a mistake. We'll talk later." He didn't wait for an answer. He moved with purpose. Melissa was already mid-conversation, one hand waving just enough to draw attention, the other resting lightly on the shoulder of a man from the Chamber of Commerce. She wore white. The kind of white that only works if you're the center of the photograph. I shifted in my chair and brushed an invisible thread from my sleeve. The jacket I wore was the one I'd bought for Ed's retirement dinner, soft navy wool with a single silver button that never stayed flat. I had sewn it back on this morning, using the same needle I kept in the back of the drawer since the house in Oak Hollow. At the check-in table, the young woman frowned at her iPad and tilted it toward her colleague. "3 times, she said not unkindly. "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" The pen I'd brought with me, blue smooth one I always carried, stayed in my bag. "That's all right," I replied. There were names in the program that surprised me. People I hadn't thought about in years. Lorna Maples, who used to bring cinnamon rolls on grading days. She was sitting at the front table laughing with someone who'd once missed an entire semester due to shingles. I remembered the way Lorna used to write her lesson plans in colored pens, the red ink always slightly thicker than the others. I looked around the edges of the room where the unimportant chairs were. That's where the older substitutes and part-time coaches sat. I didn't recognize most of them. I caught my reflection faintly in the window pane, just a gray outline against the warm light. Melissa's name was on the screen behind the podium. Melissa Whitaker, regional sponsor Bloom Skin Cosmetics. There was applause. She walked to the stage and practiced steps. "Some of us," she said, her voice amplified gently, "know what it means to work quietly behind the scenes to lift up the next generation." I watched her earrings catch the light. I remembered the first Christmas she joined our family. I had wrapped a scarf in tissue paper and tucked a handwritten recipe card inside. She never wore it. I found it months later in the garage, still in the box next to a broken lamp. I wasn't surprised that she spoke well. She always knew how to land a sentence just where it would be remembered. Scott clapped when she finished, a little louder than the rest. In my pocket, my phone vibrated once. I didn't check it. No one had asked me if I wanted to attend. I wasn't invited in the official sense. The envelope had come from Haley. She hadn't said anything about the nomination, just sent me the card with a yellow sticky note that read, "You deserve to be there. I mean it." I hadn't told her I was going. The woman with the clipboard passed by again. She handed me a paper cup of water. It was warm. I held it carefully so it wouldn't ripple over the edge. One of the banners behind the podium read, "A Legacy of Influence." I thought of my classroom, room 204. The chalkboard always left a faint gray smear no matter how much I cleaned it. My name had once been on the door in black letters. I'd peeled them off myself the day I left. I had taught for 31 years. I remembered the names of students who never turned in homework, the ones who always borrowed pens. I remembered the boy who cried while reciting Whitman. and the girl who carved "I am enough" into her desk in tiny letters no one else saw. No one asked me to speak. No one remembered I used to write the spring play scripts by hand. I set the paper cup down on the ledge beside the folding chair. It left a small, wet ring. The noise in the banquet hall grew fuller. Clinking glass, polite laughter music from a local jazz trio. The scent of rosemary chicken and buttered carrots floated in familiar and distant at once. I stood slowly. The booklet still rested where I had placed it. I left it there. As I stepped outside, the cold air settled against my skin like a correction. The parking lot shimmered slightly from earlier rain. I walked toward the far end where the shuttle buses waited, though I hadn't come on one. Behind me, applause rose again. A name I didn't recognize. Maybe someone who came after me. Maybe someone who once sat in my classroom. The streetlight above flickered once, then steadied. In my coat pocket, my fingers found the old fountain pen, the one with the dented cap. The ink inside was nearly dry, but it still made a mark. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't send a message explaining why I left. I just folded my hands in my lap, as I had done many times before, and let the silence name me. I used to believe that silence could be useful like tape, holding the seams of a family together. The window on the bus had fogged, and I had drawn nothing on it. Not even a line. My reflection wavered just enough to be unfamiliar. I kept my hands folded over my purse, the fabric worn smooth at the corners, where I used to clutch it during long school board meetings or pediatric appointments. The seat beside me stayed empty, though once years ago, Haley would have leaned into my shoulder, drawing shapes on my arm with her fingertip. She used to do that when she was nervous. Circles, then stars, then letters without meaning. I had felt useful then, like a landing place. I thought about the casserole dish I never got back, the one with the blue rim chipped at the handle. I brought it over the night Melissa defended her final paper for the MBA program. She had forgotten to eat. I kept the kids until nearly midnight. No payment was ever discussed. That was the year I started saying yes without being asked. Scott called once brief, hurried. He needed a starter cushion for the lease on a small commercial suite. I had nodded before he finished the sentence. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. We'll pay you back, of course. The money left my account 2 days later. I never mentioned it again. I told myself it was a gesture, not a loan. But still, I printed the statement and tucked it into the back of my desk drawer behind an expired passport and a half-used book of stamps. No one ever brought it up. The bus made a soft sound turning onto I-26. I watched the highway markers blur and return. I remembered Melissa's voice from last Thanksgiving. I had asked if there was anything she wanted me to bring. Why don't you do rolls and cranberry sauce? You do those well. The cranberry was homemade. Orange zest. Clove. The rolls were from Ed's old recipe, risen twice, glazed with butter and egg. I wrapped everything in linen towels and tied the ends with kitchen string. At the house, I walked in and smelled truffle oil. Everything's catered this year, Melissa had announced with a smile. Easier for everyone. She never asked about the bag in my hand. I set it gently by the coat rack. No one opened it. Later, while they served from foil pans lined in brushed aluminum, I slipped my food into the fridge without comment. It stayed there until I quietly took it back home. The next morning, I found the linen towel still damp. I washed it alone and hung it by the kitchen window where it didn't dry fully for 2 days. I kept saying yes, to babysitting with no notice, to picking up dry cleaning when Melissa was completely slammed, to driving Haley to the art museum and pretending it hadn't been planned for someone else. Last-minute change, Melissa had said. Can you step in? I had worn the beige coat that day, the one missing the top button. Haley and I walked past an exhibit called The Body Reframed. She had lingered on a sculpture of a woman with her back turned. She looks like she's listening, Haley whispered. I remembered that. I remembered Scott forgetting my birthday last year. Isn't it next week? It had already passed. I'll make it up to you, he added, not meeting my eyes. I had nodded. Again. The ring on my hand was loose. I had lost weight in the spring, and now it slid sometimes when I picked up my cup. I thought about resizing it, but never did. There were so many things I had agreed to, not out of obedience, but out of fear. Fear of making things awkward. Fear of being labeled difficult. Fear of being left off the guest list for good. I wore neutral sweaters. I kept my tone even. I smiled when dismissed. At Melissa's company party last winter, someone had asked who I was. She helps with the grandkids sometimes, Melissa replied, not turning from her conversation. Not Scott's mother, not retired teacher, just the shape of a convenience. I kept my hands in my lap then too, like now. I looked at my fingers. My nails had softened the ridges more visible with age. The skin on my knuckles folded when I bent them. Not many people notice those changes until they hold your hand and squeeze. No one had held my hand in a while. There were nights I would pour tea into the white mug with the hairline crack and stare at the base of the cabinet where the wood had chipped. I never fixed it. That little break made the house feel real somehow, not curated. Scott once told me I should sell the house. It's too much for you to manage, right? And Asheville's hot right now. You'd make a killing. I nodded at that too. Later, I pulled out an old ledger from the drawer and made a list of everything I had paid for in silence. Not to accuse, just to remember. I kept that list folded inside a book I never finished. They never knew the way I tightened my smile when corrected mid-sentence, or how often I deferred to make room. I watched the blur of trees give way to parking lots. The bus was nearly at the terminal. I checked the inside of my bag for a mint, and my fingers brushed the corner of the program from the gala. I hadn't thrown it away yet. I pressed it between two paperbacks and zipped the bag. The air on the bus shifted slightly as we slowed, the hum of quiet passengers gathering their things. A girl behind me was telling someone on the phone about her weekend plans, her voice high, fast. I imagined answering her. I imagined saying something unexpected like, I was never really missed, only remembered when it was useful. But I didn't. I kept my hands where they were. Some rooms aren't built to let you stay even if you enter softly, even if you whisper at the door. Some rooms only make space after you're gone. I don't remember the last time someone saved me a seat. The drawer stuck a little on the right side, the metal track warped just enough that I had to pull with one hand and lift with the other. I hadn't opened it in years, not since I moved the desk into the guest room and stopped calling it an office. I was looking for a lesson plan on Of Mice and Men. I had thought I might write something about it for the blog. Instead, I found a bundle of envelopes tied with string, faded to a dull gray. The kind of string they wrap bakery boxes with. I don't remember saving it for that purpose, but it felt like something I would have done. Each card was dated, some in cursive, some typed. One with glitter that never quite sealed. I opened them carefully, as if the paper might disintegrate. Most of them weren't addressed to me. There was a Christmas card with a photo of Haley in a red coat, standing in front of a sled. To Grandma Whitaker, Merry Christmas from your favorite granddaughter. The return label said the Myers family. That was Melissa's maiden name. I traced the curve of the handwriting, not Melissa's, maybe a printing service. On the back, someone had written, Love you in a felt pen, but no signature. I didn't remember receiving that one. The next was a folded program from Scott's wedding, cream cardstock gold lettering. My name was not printed anywhere. I flipped to the seating chart, table 12. I sat next to a man named Ted, who once owned a tire shop and told me 3 jokes about dentists. The photographer had never come by. Scott didn't have a mother-son dance. He danced with Melissa's mother. She raised me, Melissa had said, holding the microphone. I owe her everything. I didn't clap. I watched her dress catch the chandelier light and adjusted my bracelet so it wouldn't fall down my wrist again. In another envelope, I found a page torn from a magazine, the corner clipped neatly, the margins starred. It was a poem I had published years ago in a retirement newsletter. I had read it aloud once over dinner. That's adorable. You're becoming a hobby poet. No one asked what it was about. I had written it the day after finding Ed's watch behind the dresser. He'd been gone 6 years. I hadn't cried until I saw the second hand still ticking. The poem was called Winding Hours. I had used the image of a clock without hands. I never submitted another one. There was a yellow paper tucked behind the magazine clipping. Haley's handwriting slanted and uneven. Crayon letters. You're my favorite person in the world. The Y and the R were backwards. She had drawn a sunflower in the corner with 10 petals. No stem, the leaves, just the bloom. I kept the letter in my palm for a long time. The crayon left a slight residue. I remember the birthday party where she gave it to me. She was turning 6. I had baked lemon bars and cut them into the shape of stars. She hugged me at the door. Later that night, Melissa gave out party favors in pink mesh bags. Inside were lip glosses and plastic necklaces. One mother asked who had made the dessert. Oh, just something from a mix, Melissa replied. We threw it together. I had used fresh zest. I folded the card again and slipped it into a new envelope. Not to hide it, but to keep it from air. There was a box on the floor next to the desk labeled seasonal. Inside were strands of garland, a chipped ornament shaped like a piano, and a red stocking with my name stitched in white. The yarn had come loose on the last letter. The E dangled like it had almost detached. 1 year they stopped hanging it. We're simplifying the mantle this time. Melissa's mom did this lovely matching set. You won't mind, right? It wasn't a question. That same year, Melissa's mother gave each child a silver bracelet engraved with initials. I brought wooden puzzles handmade by a vendor at the church bazaar. They didn't open them. Scott gave me a candle that read Serenity and Sage. I lit it once, then let the wick burn itself out. There was no anger in the drawer, only inventory. Quiet acknowledgments. The notes that went unanswered. The calls returned 2 days later, if at all. The times I stood in kitchens with my hands behind my back waiting to be handed something to do. You can just relax. You don't have to worry about that. It's easier if we just keep it simple. Every time I tried to offer, I was redirected. Every time I brought something, it was duplicated. Every time I showed up, it was as though I had arrived early for a party that had already happened. I began to carry smaller bags. I began to wear earrings that didn't catch the light. I kept my comments brief and stopped printing photos. No one ever asked why I never brought a +1. No one ever said my name on the microphone. At some point, I stopped waiting to be thanked. I started watching their conversations like television reruns, predictable practice skipping over the commercial breaks. I became the person you mention once in passing, the placeholder, the quiet at the end of a paragraph. I folded the empty envelopes and placed them inside a shoebox. I taped it shut with clear tape, smooth across the seam. Not for bitterness, not for closure, only to make space. I no longer expected to be remembered in their joy. I had become the pause they built their timing around, and when the music played, mine was the note they chose to leave out. I used to remember the scent of cinnamon as something shared. The peonies were trimmed the night before. I had arranged them in the cream vase with the chipped rim, the one I kept even after the matching set was broken. They leaned slightly to one side, the heavier blooms dipping lower than I intended, but I left them that way. There was something more honest about imbalance. The oven had barely cooled when I slid in the lemon tea bread. I didn't measure like I used to. I knew it by heart. 2 eggs softened butter zest scraped from the skin in curls, not shreds. No one had called. I set the phone on the kitchen table beside the vase screen, up volume on. At 9, still nothing. At 10, I refreshed the inbox. A promotional email for garden gloves. At 11, I opened the social media app, though I hadn't posted anything since last fall. Melissa had uploaded a photo carousel. I didn't have to enlarge the images. I knew the wallpaper in their dining room. The caption read, "Mother's Day, with the most important women in our lives." In the center, her mother hair set in soft curls, a pink scarf wrapped at the shoulders. To her left, Melissa's sister holding a mimosa. On the far right, Haley and her little brother each holding a card. A floral banner arched across the wall behind them, "To the women who made us who we are." Below that, 3 place settings, 2 bouquets, no 4th chair, and under the last image, a quote in cursive font. Family is who shows up, not necessarily who's related. I didn't scroll any further. There were comments. Beautiful family. 3 generations of strength. Where's Darlene? She used to be so close with Scott. That one had no reply. I stood for a while in the middle of the kitchen, one hand on the back of the chair, not quite sitting. The bread had begun to cool the crust, pulling slightly away from the pan. The air smelled of sugar and citrus, but there was no table to place it on. At noon, I received a message. "Sorry, Grandma. Mom said today was too packed." "I miss you, though." I didn't type anything back. The bubble blinked for a moment as if she waited, then stopped. I placed the phone face down gently enough that it didn't make a sound, just a soft thud on the wood. The same kind of sound a drawer makes when it's closed, not in anger, but with finality. I didn't cry. I rinsed the knife I had used to trim the stems and folded the dish towel over the counter. Then I walked to the hallway closet, the one where I kept the out-of-season sweaters and the plastic tubs with photo albums. Behind the second bin, I found it still wrapped in its old dust jacket, the spine slightly bent from years of use. My ledger. The pages smelled faintly of ink and old glue. I had written in blue ballpoint, all in capital letters then. The handwriting was neater than I remembered. I used to keep track of every receipt, even cash tips. Ed had called it Darlene's little command center. I turned to the back pages where notes were scribbled in pencil. Ideas, quotes, reminders. Most faded now. One line stood out darker than the rest. "If no one opens the door, build your own room." I remember the day I wrote it. I was 32. The bookstore we managed in Kentucky had lost its lease. I had suggested converting the back garage into a pop-up space weekend readings book swap secondhand trades. Ed doubted it would work. I made it work anyway. That winter we had children pressing their palms to the frosted window, peering in at books strung from string lights. No one had asked me what I wanted to do since. I ran my finger along the edge of the page, the paper fraying where I had turned it too often. I didn't need a bookstore now. I didn't need shelves. I needed to remember that building was still an option. Scott hadn't forgotten. He had chosen not to remember. There is a difference. That morning I had brushed my hair twice. I had picked the blouse with pearl buttons. I had sliced strawberries and set the good china out, though no one was coming. I had done these things not out of hope, but out of practice. Once I was the center. The holiday depended on me arriving early, setting napkins, checking that no one used plastic cups. Now I wasn't late. I wasn't early. I wasn't expected. I don't think it hurt in the way people imagine it would. It was quieter than that. It was the sound of a hallway clock ticking after the power has gone out, steady but irrelevant. I closed the ledger and placed it on the kitchen table. The vase had tilted a little further. One of the peonies had lost 2 petals, and they lay like scraps of silk near the salt shaker. I didn't sweep them up. I let them stay. Some things deserve to fall where they will. There's a difference between leaving and disappearing. I didn't do either. I just stopped waiting to be noticed. I had written the message in fewer words than I'd imagined I would. I'm going to take some time for myself. No need to worry. I stared at the screen for a moment before pressing send. The gray checkmark appeared, then stayed gray. I didn't expect it to turn blue. I placed the phone down beside the folded grocery list and tore that list in half without reading it again. The first thing I removed was my name from the family updates group. It took 3 taps. No one followed. No balloon emoji. No question. I clicked out of the streaming account I once paid for, though Melissa had changed the profile photo to a picture of her sister's dog. I had watched old documentaries on that account. Ken Burns, Jane Goodall. Those things hadn't mattered to them. The bank login was slower. I had to dig through drawers for the code sheet they mailed me when I agreed to co-sign the savings account for Haley's school fund. Scott said, "It's just for show, Mom, nothing really moves through that." Still, they had put my name there when it was convenient. I called the bank. The woman on the line had a warm voice and said, "No problem, Mrs. Whitaker," though it took her 3 attempts to locate the file. When she finally said, "You're all set, it's been unlinked," I felt nothing change in the room. No hum of closure. In the drawer with the old power cords and warranty papers, I found the small black pouch. It hadn't been opened in over a year. The ring inside wasn't heavy, but I had carried its weight differently for decades. Ed's initials were still etched on the inside. The band was scuffed from time, not mistreatment. I drove to the jeweler's I remembered from years ago, a quiet shop that still hand-wrote receipts. The man behind the counter looked at the ring, then at me, and asked if I was sure. I didn't explain. I nodded. The amount he offered wasn't high, but it was enough. The laptop came in a pale cardboard box with a silver seal. I peeled it back like someone unwrapping an apology they had given to themselves. I didn't post about it. I didn't ask for recommendations. I didn't type new beginnings in cursive on any photos. The house looked the same from the outside. But inside, I moved the armchair out of the front room and dusted off the wooden desk I had saved from the old bookstore. The desk had one wobbly leg and a drawer that stuck slightly when pulled too far. I didn't fix either. I placed the laptop on top, opened a blank document, and watched the cursor blink. From the shelf in the hallway, I took down the ledger again. On the next empty page, I wrote, Day 1. Learn how to buy a domain name. I looked up a guide. It wasn't difficult. A few steps, a few dollars. The hardest part was choosing a name that hadn't already been taken. Everything I thought of felt too performative. I didn't want to sound like I was starting over. I wasn't. I chose something quiet. A combination of 2 words from my mother's old recipe box, amber and notch. Nothing poetic, just mine. Later that evening, Melissa sent a message 4 days after my note. Hey, everything okay? Just been slammed with work. We'll call soon. I didn't respond. The message didn't deserve one. That same night, a notification popped up. Haley had left a heart emoji on one of my older posts, an image of a book spine with a quote about pages folding back on themselves. No follow-up. Just that. I didn't write back. I moved through the house with a sort of stillness that felt unfamiliar at first. Not emptiness, just the absence of questions I no longer had to answer. No one asked me to explain the silence. No one noticed I had stopped attending the Thursday calls or logging into the shared calendar. I didn't unshare it. I just stopped adding things. One morning, I received a forwarded bill from Scott's office, an old subscription tied to my name. I emailed the company requested removal and marked the thread as archived. The mail still came to my door. Catalogs, circulars. One card from a neighbor named June who liked to drop off homemade muffins on Saturdays. She never knocked. She just left them by the door. I saved her note. Inside the fridge, I made room for fewer things. I kept cream for coffee, not for guests. I stopped buying crackers in bulk. My hands stayed busy. I wrote lists, then didn't follow them. I opened tabs, then closed them without bookmarking. One afternoon, while rearranging files on the laptop, I found a photo from years ago, me holding a ribbon at a state teachers' convention, my arm around a girl who had written a speech on Emily Dickinson. I didn't remember her name, but I remembered the line she quoted saying nothing sometimes says the most. I closed the photo. I didn't delete it. I folded the dust cloth over the desk. I didn't wipe the screen. Not everything had to shine to be seen. I didn't realize I had stopped humming until the silence began to hum back. It happened while stirring a cup of chamomile, the kind I bought in bulk, now not for sleep, but for stillness. I'd left the tag on the string this time, watched it dip and rise with the steam. There was something soothing in things that didn't ask to be impressive. Each morning I opened the laptop slowly, as if the screen needed time to remember me. I never rushed it. There were no deadlines, no login requests from grandkids who'd forgotten their passwords again. Just me and a search bar. Beginner Guide to Blogging. How to connect Stripe to Squarespace. What is a domain registrar? My handwriting returned to me in cautious loops and upright letters filling the yellow legal pad beside the keyboard. I wrote like I used to make inventory lists at the bookstore practical, unpretty, entirely mine. Somewhere along the way, I stopped logging into the family group chat. The little red dot on my phone screen remained untouched, like a sealed envelope I never signed up to receive. I muted it. Then I forgot it. The blog took shape slowly. I named it Maple and Memory. Not for branding, just because I had an old candle labeled Maple Hearth that still carried the scent of bedtime when Scott was little. Back then, one whiff and he'd say, "That's the sleepy candle." I hadn't burned it in years. Now I let it soften the air again just for me. I wrote posts no one asked for, how to repurpose torn pillowcases into sachets, what to do with a drawer full of broken zippers, recipes for when your table only needs one plate. I never used the word healing. I just told the truth. Quietly. The first comment came 12 days in, a name I didn't recognize. I thought I was the only one left behind. Your words made me cry in the best way. I didn't reply right away. I read it again, then again. Then I stood up and watered the potted ivy I'd been ignoring. Let the drops fall heavy and slow. I spent that afternoon wiping the baseboards, no reason. Just to know the walls remembered someone lived here. I didn't tell Scott. I didn't tell Melissa. The last thing I wanted was for them to tilt their heads and say, "That's sweet, Mom. You're keeping busy." As if motion alone was the measure of mattering. Instead, I created a subscriber list of 9 people, then 14, then 26. No one asked who I was married to. No one cared whose last name I had. It was freeing, like stepping into a room with no mirrors and realizing you never needed one. I mailed my first handmade order in July, a batch of recipe cards bundled with jute twine and a pressed violet tucked inside. The customer's shipping name was just Ruthie May. No address label, just a peel and stick barcode and a sense that someone out there still handwrote thank you notes. I kept hers. One afternoon, I got an email titled, "Potential Collaboration." I assumed it was spam. It wasn't. It was from a retired art teacher in Idaho who ran a podcast called Patchwork Women. She'd read my entry on button jars. "I haven't thought of mine in years," she wrote. "I used to let my granddaughter sort them by color." I replied with a photograph of my own jar, green lid, cracked glass, one button shaped like a duck. No words, just the picture. She answered. Somehow, this feels like prayer. There are kinds of companionship you find only after everyone else has gone home. One night, Melissa texted again. The notification read, "Haley's college essay mentioned you. Thought you'd want to know." I didn't open it. I had learned not all mentions are invitations. Instead, I baked cinnamon rolls and left the center one in the tray. That used to be Scott's favorite. I didn't eat it. I didn't throw it out. I just left it to cool. I started using linen napkins again, just for myself. The ones with the stitched border that had faded into a pale memory of seafoam. I placed one beside my plate like I was expecting company. No one came. That was the point. I found my grandmother's fountain pen in the back of a drawer. The nib, rusted ink, long gone. I cleaned it with vinegar, dried it on a flour sack towel, and placed it beside my laptop. I didn't use it. I just wanted it there. Something that once wrote letters long before emails, when slowness meant care, not inefficiency. On a Saturday, I spent 3 hours designing a printable grocery list template. It was nothing special, just columns for produce pantry and notes. I shared it on the blog. 39 people downloaded it. No applause, no emojis, just quiet usefulness. That evening, I lit the maple candle again. Not because I was sad, not because I missed someone, just because the room had earned something warm. I wrote a new entry, 10 things that take time, and that's the point. Number 4 was learning to live as if you are your own guest. When I finished, I didn't hit publish right away. I reread it in full. I fixed 2 typos. I changed one sentence from "you might" to "you may." Then I saved it in drafts. I closed the laptop. I folded a dish towel over the keyboard. Not to protect it, but to remind myself that I could pause. I poured a glass of water and drank half. I left the rest untouched. Some stillness shouldn't be filled. I didn't think a few paragraphs typed in the quiet would ripple into someone else's headline. They used the photo with the chipped mug. I hadn't even realized the journalist had taken it from the side-angle me in my cotton robe, that old flannel one, with one frayed cuff, sitting with my fingers hovering just above the keyboard. The sunlight caught the curve of my glasses, not my face. I was grateful for that. A name, a short blurb, and the link starting over at 72. That's how it began. By the next morning, I had 200 unread emails. Someone from Oregon wanted to feature the post on a podcast. A small paper in Vermont asked for permission to reprint. I turned off my phone after the 3rd call from numbers I didn't recognize. That evening, the screen blinked with a familiar name. Melissa's voice filled the room too quickly. "Oh my God! Mom, you're famous! I just saw you on Facebook through a friend. I had no idea you were doing all this. Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at the steam rising from my tea, then down at the spoon resting on the saucer. A light stain traced the handle where the glaze had worn off years ago. She kept talking. "Scott said this is the kind of thing we've been brainstorming about forever. Family-led brand. Authentic stories. Legacy content. This is gold." Scott's voice chimed in from the background. "We've been looking for a hook. This could be it." "You write, I manage, Melissa handles visuals. It's clean, it's scalable." Another chime. My inbox lit up again, this time a shared Google Drive folder labeled Whitaker Legacy Media Strategy Draft. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I reached for the cardigan draped over my chair, the one with the buttons that don't quite match. I'd sewn them on during a power outage years ago. One brown one, clear, one too big. Melissa's voice returned this time, slower sweetened. It just makes sense, Mom. You've already done the hard part. Let's do the rest together for the family. That word didn't settle. Later that night, another call lit the screen. Haley. She didn't say much. No big reveal, no strategy. I saw the flyer, she said. About your online talk. I'd like to come just to be there. I didn't write anything down in that moment, not while she was speaking. But after the screen dimmed, I opened the notebook and turned to a fresh page. A fire doesn't ask who gathers near once it starts to warm. The next morning, the contract draft arrived in PDF form. It began with polished phrases: joint venture, brand alignment, audience equity. A few lines down, I saw the clause about content rights. The wording was subtle, but it was clear who would retain ownership. I reread it slowly, the way I used to reread receipts from the bookstore in the early days, checking every line item twice when Ed worried about rent. I remembered using paper clips to keep the ledgers closed when the metal clasp broke. Melissa followed up with a voice note. We want you to feel involved. You'd have full editorial say. We just think. You know, it's a great moment to unify the story. There was a time I would have called back to explain I needed more time, that I didn't understand all the legal language, that I wanted to believe in them again. Instead, I clicked the pen beside me and circled a single line in the document. Content submitted under this agreement will be considered intellectual property of Whitaker Legacy Media. I didn't respond that night. Instead, I went back to the draft folder of my own site. In the post queue, a piece titled, How to Begin Again at Any Age, waited to be scheduled. I hadn't planned to publish it yet. It felt too raw, too quiet. But now the stillness of it felt right. At the end of the piece, I added one line I wasn't erased. I was paused. And now I've hit play again my way. Later, while making tea, I noticed the corner of a sticky note still stuck to the cabinet near the sink. Haley had left it years ago when she visited for a weekend. Love you, Grandma. Don't forget your vitamins. The ink had faded, but the outline of the heart she'd drawn remained. I folded the contract draft into quarters and slipped it into a drawer beneath the old gardening gloves, not trashed, just set aside. By the time the webinar came, I'd ironed a blouse I hadn't worn since Ed's retirement dinner. The thread on the collar was slightly loose, but it held. The host introduced me with warmth, a voice from the hills of North Carolina reminding us that it's never too late to matter. When the screen shifted to my camera, I didn't smile too wide. I let the silence speak first. There was no logo behind me, no hashtag on screen, just a woman and her words. After the talk ended, the chat filled with hearts and thank you messages. A few called me brave. A few said I reminded them of their mother. One simply typed, I needed this. I didn't print any of it out. I just closed the laptop and ran my finger along the edge of the table. A week later, a final text from Scott arrived. We need an answer. Investors are ready. Don't miss the window. I didn't reply. I turned the page in my notebook and wrote, Some doors only open when you stop knocking. I never thought stillness could carry such weight. Not the kind that presses you down, but the kind that holds you gently in place like two palms cupped around a candle flame. I felt that weight the morning I opened my inbox and saw 4 digits next to the word subscribers. I didn't touch the number. I just stared at it until the steam from my tea curved and disappeared into the air. The talk had gone live the night before. Bloom's Summit. I spoke from the same wooden chair I used to read bedtime stories in. My cardigan sleeves folded just once at the wrists, hair pulled back with the clip I kept in the drawer, marked miscellaneous. They asked me to speak about reinvention. I spoke about subtraction. I told them about the brunch table where there was no chair for me, about the name that quietly vanished from the group chat, about the birthday that passed without a message, except for one that came 2 days late and started with, "Oh no, we totally forgot. I didn't use names. I didn't list dates. Just moments. Like breadcrumbs, but the kind you never expect anyone to follow." Later, someone from the summit team emailed to say the chat had exploded. I didn't open it. Instead, I sat with a notebook open to a clean page. I pressed the pen to the paper not to write, just to feel the resistance. A few days later, Haley posted a clip from the talk. I found out because someone tagged me in a comment that read, "Her granddaughter sees her clearer than her own children do." Haley's caption: "The world finally heard what I've known since I was 6. My grandma is extraordinary." I didn't repost it. Instead, I walked to the cabinet above the stove where I kept the glass jar of loose chamomile. Taped to the underside was a recipe card, yellowed and curling at the corners. Ed's handwriting in pencil: lemon oat muffins for early mornings only. I placed it on the counter and wiped the dust from the edges. The last time I'd baked them was when Scott graduated middle school. I remembered Melissa complaining they were too earthy. At noon, I joined the mentoring circle online. Faces in little boxes, voices slightly delayed. The topic was pivoting after loss. Most shared job layoffs, early retirement, canceled plans. When it was my turn, I said, they saw me when someone else saw me first. But I saw myself when no one else looked. That's the real shift. One woman let out a small sound like an exhale that had waited years. Another nodded with her chin tucked deep into her scarf. After the call ended, I reread the outline I had drafted for a winter course. 8 weeks. Titled, "New Roots After the Storm." Designed for women over 60. Widows, divorcees, daughters. No one calls back. The modules weren't about business strategy. They were about re-entry. Waking up without waiting for the phone. Eating with the radio on instead of silence. Choosing a new password that didn't contain your wedding date. I placed a post-it on the front of the folder. Start recording by next Tuesday. That evening, Melissa sent a voice note. "It's wild seeing all the attention you're getting. You're like viral. I keep thinking maybe this could lead somewhere, with the right team." The background noise in the recording was unmistakable. Clinking plates, silverware, a TV in the distance. She didn't say she was proud, just curious, transactional, measured. I didn't respond. I folded a dish towel along the seam and tucked it back in the drawer. Later that week, a publishing assistant from a women's imprint emailed with the subject line, "Potential Memoir Project." I didn't open it right away. I printed it instead, clipped it to the back of my notebook, and wrote on the bottom corner, "Think later." That same day, I received a letter in the mail, actual ink on paper. The return address was from a woman in Indiana. Inside was a single sheet, handwritten in shaky blue ballpoint. "Your words made the silence in my house feel less like punishment. I keep a printed copy of your blog by the lamp now." There was no request, no ask, just presence. I kept the letter folded beneath the coaster on my desk. It's still there. By the end of the month, Maple in Memory had tripled in traffic. The site froze once just after I uploaded a new recipe for honey cornmeal biscuits. I didn't know what to do, so I unplugged the modem and made myself a sandwich. When it came back, there were 117 comments. I read them one by one. Not to track engagement, but to remember what it was like to be seen without being needed for something. One simply said, "You reminded me I'm not invisible." I sat for a while after that. No music, no clock ticking. Just the hum of something alive in the quiet. I didn't light a candle. I didn't pour a glass of wine. I just placed my palm flat against the wood of the desk, felt the warmth rise through it slowly, like bread catching heat in a forgotten oven. And I thought, they replaced me in their photos, but not in my own reflection. I never expected the final signature to feel so light in my hand. The envelope was cream-colored, too formal for what it contained. The letter inside didn't address me directly, just my full legal name, followed by a standard request from a law office I didn't recognize. They were acting on behalf of my son, it said, in regard to a property adjustment to streamline inheritance and ease the tax burden on future beneficiaries. The cabin, the one by the lake. There was a sticky note attached, not in Scott's handwriting. A woman's looped cursive read, "Let us know by Friday. Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker." The Mrs. caught me more than the deadline did. I hadn't used that name in years. Ed had been gone a decade. I let the paper sit untouched on the table while I rinsed a chipped mug that still held the stain of my morning tea. The cabin hadn't crossed my mind in months. I used to picture it every summer. The smell of firewood, Ed's old flannel draped over the rocking chair, the laughter echoing from the porch swing. But the silence that followed those memories was louder now. No one had mentioned it since the last July we spent there, the one where Melissa brought matching towels for everyone and insisted the old board games were too musty for the kids. That was the same summer I was asked gently but firmly not to bake anymore because we've been doing plant-based for the girls. I never liked confrontation, so I folded the apron instead. I drove out 2 mornings later. No one knew. I didn't leave a note. The road to the cabin hadn't changed much. The same brittle pines, the same curve where Ed once skidded off, and we spent 3 hours waiting for a tow truck, eating peanuts and laughing until our stomachs hurt. I remembered thinking then that discomfort shared was its own kind of intimacy. The gate was unlatched. I parked farther back than usual, almost behind the tree line, like I didn't want the place to notice I was there. The windows were streaked with pollen. A layer of dust blanketed the porch rail, and a bird had built a nest in the crook of the lamp fixture. I didn't mind. Inside, the furniture sat in patient stillness. The kitchen counters bore the faint ring of a glass left behind. The rocking chair still had Ed's favorite blanket, blue frayed along the edges, one patch stitched unevenly from when Haley tried sewing as a Girl Scout badge. I ran my hand over it, letting the fibers press against my skin. The photograph on the mantel hadn't been touched. Scott was about 9 in it, arms wrapped around my neck, cheeks still full. Ed stood behind us, hand resting on my shoulder. We were whole in that frame, unaware of the years that would come and hollow out the ease in our smiles. I took a cloth bag from the car. Inside were 3 things: a newer photograph, though not recent, the deed paper signed and dated without ceremony, and a handwritten note. I didn't reread it. I already knew what it said. There had been no argument, no phone call, not even a pretended courtesy of "we were wondering how you felt about this." It was just assumed that the cabin belonged to the next phase of their lives, that I would fold out of the picture like a crease, returning to the page. I left the bag just inside the door. The note on top. The latch clicked when I locked the door. I didn't look back. On the drive home, I passed by a roadside stand with handmade candles. A woman with gray braids sat behind the table reading a paperback with the cover folded back. I didn't stop. I just watched the way her elbow held her place on the page while she laughed at something I couldn't hear. At home, the dining table was covered with scraps of printer paper markers and a stapler. I had been planning next month's retreat for women who signed up through the new site, Legacy and Light. The name had come to me while peeling apples one night. It wasn't clever, but it felt clean. 12 women had registered. Some sent short bios. Widowed at 58. Retired teacher, no kids. My son doesn't speak to me anymore. I read each one and made small notes beside their names. No advice, just observances. I flipped to the notebook I kept by the lamp. A red pen circled the location for our first gathering. It wasn't a cabin. It was a repurposed farmhouse with a long porch and one oak tree out front. The porch reminded me of the one we never got to fix at the lake. I didn't write much that night. Just a line at the bottom of the page. A house can hold people, but only you decide what holds you. I pressed the pen cap down and sat still. The candle beside me flickered low, the last of a scent called winter birch. I'd bought it on clearance, thinking the name felt more like a decision than a season. There were no voicemails on my phone, no missed calls. Scott hadn't followed up. Maybe he assumed the silence meant yes. Or maybe silence had become something they expected of me, like background music in a waiting room. Not unpleasant, but not worth listening to. I didn't mind anymore. I walked to the closet, folded Ed's last cardigan, the brown one with the missing button, and placed it in the donation box. I kept the button, though. Slipped it into the drawer with my sewing kit. Maybe someone at the retreat would know how to stitch it back properly. I stood at the window for a while, watching a deer move through the brush, slow and unhurried. The world kept offering these quiet things that didn't ask to be acknowledged, but stayed just the same. I didn't need to reclaim the cabin. I had already built something warmer. And this time, no one would ask me to leave the oven off. I used to wait for acknowledgement like it was weather, something that might arrive if I stood still long enough. The lavender tea tasted stronger today. Not bitter, just more itself. I didn't measure the leaves as carefully as I used to, and maybe that's why. The mug had a fine hairline crack near the handle now. I kept using it anyway. A year passes more quietly when you're not waiting for it to prove anything. I sat by the kitchen window. The light filtered in soft and slow, catching on the edge of the glass jar where I kept dried lemon peels. Haley had once asked if I planned to use them. I told her some things are kept, not for function, but for the way they remind you to be gentle. She visits monthly now, not because she has to. There's no obligation in the way she knocks no glance at the time while she pours tea. Last time she folded a flyer she made for our summer launch and slipped it between the pages of my planning book. Her handwriting in the margin memory boxes for the lives no one documented. She doesn't ask why I don't talk about Scott or Melissa anymore. There was an email from them 3 weeks ago. Just a forwarded newsletter article about generational branding. No greeting, no signature, no warmth. I archived it without opening the attachment. Once Melissa pulled me aside at a brunch years before any of this and told me, while adjusting a cloth napkin, "You know, it's not that we don't appreciate you. It's just that you're kind of background now. Stable, predictable." She meant it as a compliment. That sentence stayed with me longer than any holiday card. The notebook beside me was open to a fresh page. I didn't write yet. Just let my pen rest across the margin. There's a discipline to not filling space just because it's there. This morning marked 1 year since I printed my first entry on Maple in Memory. Back then, I didn't think anyone would read it. I wrote about small things, how a button on Ed's coat had held longer than our mortgage, or how the silence after dinner grew louder when there were no more chairs to push in. I didn't edit much. I didn't try to sound wise. Now there are over 100,000 readers. Most came quietly through shared links and forwarded emails. They don't comment often, but sometimes they reply with a single line, "Thank you." I thought I was the only one. That's enough. The paid newsletter Tea Letters has 700 subscribers. I don't promote it. I just send it. It's the only thing I've ever done that didn't rely on anyone else to say yes. Haley wants to intern with me this summer. She made the decision on her own. Her college counselor called to confirm it wanted to be sure the experience would align with her professional growth trajectory. I told him we were starting a program for older women to record and print their life stories in keepsake boxes. He paused, then asked if we had an LLC. We do. I signed the paperwork the same day I folded away my last apron. I don't miss the way Scott used to check his watch when I spoke, or how Melissa would correct my phrasing with a smile that said it was for my own good. When they reached out about collaborating branding at Whitaker Legacy Media, I didn't answer. No rejection, just absence. That silence said more than any argument would have. It remains undisturbed. Some people retreat after being forgotten. I didn't retreat. I restructured. The house I live in now isn't large. It doesn't need to be. It has warm floors and shelves I built myself. Every morning I write a paragraph, not for publication, not for legacy, just because my hands still move and I want to remember how to listen to them. Yesterday, a letter arrived from Oregon. A woman named Evelyn. She wrote that my words helped her through the first New Year's Eve after her husband passed. She printed one of my essays and taped it to her fridge. She enclosed a photo of it, creased, smudged at the corners. I framed the letter. I hung it beside the window just above the basil plant that never grows quite right, but still reaches for the light anyway. Gloria, my old mentor, published her book this spring, Living Out Loud After 65. I read it twice, then mailed her a note. You didn't shout. You whispered clearly enough for the deaf parts of me to hear. Our mentor group has grown. 20 women now from 7 different states. We meet monthly, some with babies in the background, others with oxygen tubes beside their chairs. No one tries to sound younger than they are. No one says still before listing their skills. There's no room for apology when you've stopped asking for permission. The kitchen clock ticked once, then again. I opened the window slightly. The air came in warm without edge. No delivery vans, no doorbell, just the low trill of birds that didn't need audience or applause. I reached for my pen. The ink flowed without hesitation. At the top of the page, Q2 Planning. Begin series when 70 starts to feel like 17. Teach Haley email list maintenance. Write every morning, even if no one reads. I underlined the last point. I used to wait for someone to say, "You matter." I'd measure my worth by how often I was remembered. Now I write not because the world sees me, but because I do. And that finally is enough.